Hi, I'm Sheila Kuehl. Welcome to Get Used to It. Today we're doing what we've actually been doing quite often lately, which is to bring you another in the series of Voices in Our Lives. What we'd like to do is to bring you sort of exemplary members of the community. I see the one I'm interviewing today is smiling, thinking, me, exemplary? But she really is. Today we're going to visit with Virginia Uribe, who is the founder of Project 10, which started out as really a very small group of students, gay and lesbian students, who wanted to talk and see if there was some way that they could improve their lot at school. And it grew into a project in a number of different high schools in the LA Unified School District to support and really empowerment, I think, of these youth. But I'll let Gina Uribe, as we know her fondly, tell you herself. Welcome to Get Used to It.
Thank you very much, Sheila.
Really glad you're here.
Well, glad to be here.
There are a lot of projects like Project 10 around the country now. I think maybe not as old, but sort of was like striking a match, wasn't it?
Well, I think we're the oldest, yes.
Yeah.
And we get inquiries all the time from school districts that want to take a part, at least, of the model of Project 10 and apply it to their own school district. Maybe they can't do the whole thing, but they might do some part of it, like training teachers or boosting their libraries or whatever. So we're getting the word around.
Well, it's one of the most difficult places, I think, to get some kind of support or get any kind of agreement from administration or the powers that be that this is a good thing to do, because I think there's this sense that if you can discourage gay and lesbian youth somehow by undermining them, then they'll suddenly change their lifestyle and be straight. And there's just been a lot of opposition.
Well, you know, the homophobia underlying the whole youth issue, gay youth issue, is really very strong. First of all, I think there's been a kind of a feeling in education that if you associated gay people with young people, there was sort of the specter of pedophilia surrounding it. And I think that discouraged a lot of gay people from becoming involved in work with youth, and it certainly scared the non-gay population silly about the idea. So that's one thing. Then I think there's another force that's very, very strong, and that is the idea, and you mentioned it, that unless you speak negatively about homosexuality, you are going to somehow influence young people to become homosexual. So the theory has always been, you know, if you're going to discuss gay subjects, do them in a bad way, make it sound terrible, or else the kids will just be rushing up, you know, signing up. So I think those forces have made it very difficult to work in the school system.
Well, you look like everybody's grandmother or the teacher of everybody's dreams. I mean, or the lady on the See's candy box. I mean, you wouldn't fit the stereotype of a wild-eyed gay radical activist. So I'm kind of interested, as I am, I think, with everybody, to kind of draw out the threads and see how this all started. Where did you come from? Where were you born and grew up?
Actually, I'm really a very traditional kind of person. I was born and raised in Pasadena, lived in the same house practically my whole life, and when I finally moved away, I only moved 2 blocks away, so I've lived in the same area my entire life. I've only been in 2 schools in my whole life. The majority of my teaching profession has been at Fairfax High School and in Los Angeles. And I think that I don't think of myself as a wild-eyed radical. I sort of evolved into an activist without really thinking what was happening. I got involved in this area in education with students who were totally underserved by the educational system, and gradually, as I became involved with them, I found myself becoming an activist without even really knowing it.
Well, it's accidental activism.
Accidental activism,
really, I think it happens to a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
But when you were growing up, what was your childhood like? What did your dad do and your mom?
I had a very normal, wonderful childhood, I think.
Well, don't ask anyone to assess it for you.
I mean, my parents were second-generation Italian. We lived with my grandparents. We all lived together in a big house in Pasadena. My father had a service station for many years down in the center of Los Angeles near the Olympic Auditorium. And one of my great thrills as I got a little bit older, since I was always a tomboy, one of my great thrills was that he was just a block away from the Olympic Auditorium, and they used to have the fights on Wednesday nights or whatever it was, and so his service station had a big parking lot, and we used to park cars for the fights, and I got to go down there and direct with the flashlight, and oh, I just loved that. So he was there. He had a station for 25 years, and then he bought some service stations for what was at that time the Flying A service stations, and he lived out his life doing that. And my mother was basically a homebody, although she did work for my grandfather as a bookkeeper, but she was more or less at home.
And were they activists themselves in any way, or
my family? They were Democratic Party activists, and my grandfather was very involved in Democratic politics, and he used to know a lot of the politicians, and we had big parties at our house. My grandfather loved this country. He was so proud to be part of this country, and as a matter of fact, he was foreman of the grand jury, which at that time was really something, and someone criticized him because of his accent. And I remember his answer was that, you know, they were born in this country, but he chose to come here, and he loved this country. So I was raised with that kind of a feeling, and a feeling of justice. People were entitled to their just due in this world. And I think that probably did influence me a lot as I grew older and began to try and understand myself and the injustices that were perpetrated on gay and lesbian people.
What made you decide to become a teacher? And what kind of a teacher did you become? Subject matter.
The question of how did I become a teacher? Well, I went to Immaculate Heart College, and I graduated in 1955. In those days, if you were a woman, I mean, chances are you could only be a teacher or a nurse or a social worker. Those were the three things presented to us. I had a relative who was a teacher, and so I kind of found my way. And then Immaculate Heart College turned out mostly teachers, so it was a natural thing for me to go into. And I love science. I got a very good science background there, and so when I graduated, I got a very good job as a science teacher.
So what was happening to you at this time about whether you were a lesbian or not? I mean, some of us,
pretending I wasn't. I was pretending I wasn't a lesbian at this time. I mean, I knew that what I had to do was get married, and that would make me normal. And if I just got married and had a family, all this gay, well, I didn't even use the word gay, and lesbian was so far from my vocabulary, but all of these funny feelings would be gone if I just did this thing that was, quote, normal. And I did meet another teacher at my first teaching position, which was at Marshall High School, and we did get married, and in those days you couldn't be in the same school if you couldn't teach in the same school if you were married, so that's how I happened to leave Marshall and go to Fairfax High School. And we had some very nice years together, traveling and enjoying life a lot, but I was internally, I was really going through tremendous turmoil over this, as yet kind of undefined in my mind as to what it was that was happening. And finally, after I'd been married for many years, really I fell in love with a woman, and it was just like a bolt of lightning, and I began to see what indeed was my true self. I mean, I'm making it sound very dramatic.
Well, I guess very dramatic in each person's life, isn't it?
I guess it was very dramatic.
And you had children
at the time, and I had children. I was involved, at the time I got divorced, I was involved in a very nasty custody battle over the issue. And that, I guess, that was very painful. And I guess that also solidified kind of my idea on the injustices that one encountered if one really did identify.
So did it come out in your custody battle that,
it did come
that you
out.
were a lesbian? And did that affect your work? I mean, did the school know?
No, the school did not ever know. It only affected my work in the sense of, you know, it certainly got me off track.
Sure.
But no, the school did not know. It did come out in the custody case. I did retain custody of my children, but I had a very oppressive legal thing hanging over me where I was ordered by the judge never to be in the presence of a woman alone
In front of your children?
In front of the children. And I lived with that for many years.
Well, that was not an unusual order to be made at the time
as I look
either.
back on it now, it was certainly not unusual.
I mean, even in the 80s when I was practicing family law and, you know, representing lesbian mothers, sometimes the order, depending, no longer right here in LA, but sort of around the edges, the orders would be very similar. That must have been very hard.
It was. That was a very difficult time in my life, yes.
So here you are, you're a science teacher at Fairfax High, in the closet, at least at school. Did you have any kind of social life or support system at all?
Not much as far as the gay community was concerned. I actually became involved in the gay community because I thought, I mean, this is after all the custody things and everything else, I thought, well, somehow I've got to come out to my children. As I found out later, they already knew it, so I never did end up telling them anything that was unusual to them. And I regret now not being honest with my children. But I got into therapy because I tried to figure out a way to come out to my children. And I was so isolated at the time, I can remember the therapist suggesting to me that I go to some event. It's funny how things stay in your mind. I remember that there was a Whitman Brooks conference at the University of Southern California. It was the first thing I ever went to that was a gay event. And I circled around the block and circled around the block and I was so afraid to go inside. And then I went inside and I saw all these really nicely dressed, well-groomed people, intelligent-looking people, and I thought to myself, well, they're not nearly as funny-looking as my faculty at school, so what am I afraid of? But those kinds of things, you know, really stick in your mind.
Everybody's got their circling the block story.
The circling the block, that's
really?
right. So whenever I hear that story, I can really relate to it. Anyway, as I became involved in the therapy process, and the therapist kept telling me, you know, you have to get out, you have to do this, you have to lead groups, you know, push yourself out. And then an occasion happened. And a judge at the time, Judge Rand Schrader, asked me if I would be on a television program. And that was another step in my coming out process. You know, and when I finally agreed to do that, I realized that, you know, I would have to become more public. This was all very new to me. It really was a different life. It's something I can hardly relate to now.
Now, was this before the group started?
No, this is what precipitated probably my ability to form that group, was that I was at that stage. And as I've described to a lot of people, it's kind of like a cosmic circumstance. I mean, I was at that stage in my life, and then an incident occurred at school where a gay young man was harassed out of school. It was a very nasty incident. And one of my students who was gay, I assumed he was gay, came up and told me about it. And he said, you know, do you think we could talk about this a little bit? So I met with some students who were gay. We met at lunchtime.
They identified each other.
They were all having lunch together.
Picked you right out of the crowd.
And they picked me right out of the crowd. That's because I was so well hidden.
How did they know? You do wonder that.
I know. So we got to talking, and that was really the beginning of Project 10. And it was this sort of grassroots group that developed because of this one young person. And we got to talking, and then we began to meet on a regular basis. And
how many students came to the first
Well,
meeting?
at first there were maybe 8 or 9 the first session, but within a month there were 25 students that were coming.
Were they all gay or lesbian?
So, well, most of them identified as gay or lesbian, and some were, I don't know, they were just there.
I think we'd say, huh?
Well, now we say questioning, then they just sort of wandered in, you know. And so when I saw that it was getting so big, and there was like, you know, a laboratory in front of me of these students who were very intelligent but not performing well and so on. Anyway, I thought, well, I've got to talk to the principal of the school.
Let's talk for a minute about the laboratory aspect that you referred to, though, before. What do you mean exactly?
Well, you know, I had done a lot of reading about gay and lesbian youth. As a matter of fact, I got my doctorate in psychology with an emphasis on adolescent homosexuality. And I knew that there were certain characteristics of so many young people who were struggling with issues of homosexuality, and one thing was many of them got involved in self-destructive acts. Many of them tried to commit suicide. The rates were very high on that. Many of them did not perform to what their intelligence quotient you would think that they would perform, because they were having so many problems with their families and issues at school and being harassed and everything. And then finally I'm talking to a group of students and I see all of these things that I've been reading in a book are present really in these students. That's why I say it was like I had a laboratory in front of me. Mm-hmm. And so I got up my courage, screwed up my courage, went to talk to the principal, and that was the third part of the cosmic experience. I happened to find the only principal, I think, in the LAUSD that was okay with the issue. And he said, you know, I explained to him about these students, about how we were meeting and what had been the catalyst and so on. And I said, you know, I thought that there was a great gap in the educational system for these students. They were really underserved. And he said, you know, I'm not gay. Well, he didn't even say he wasn't gay himself. He said, I don't know very much about gay issues. I don't know much about the problems of gay youth, but we are public educators. And our job is to try and meet the needs of all of our students. And if this is an area that is not being met, then we ought to do something about it. So, as I say, I was very lucky to have him. And he stood behind me. He backed up the program. He said he would support me. He did do so. He took all those first telephone calls that came in, including one from Jesse Helms' office, who had gotten wind of it and wanted to know if there was any federal money in this program. So,
he said, no, there's no money at all in
that's
this
what
program.
I said. I said, there's hardly any money at all. So, but Warren Steinberg, my principal, took all those phone calls, and he just kept repeating that we were public educators and that we had a duty to all of our students. So that was very fortunate. He gave me some good nuts and bolts advice about getting people within the district, you know, high up within the district to sign on to this program, so that if it was attacked, which it was later on, that there would be some backing from the district. And he suggested that I kind of develop a model that could be replicated in other high schools, and basically that's what I did and what has happened.
Why did you have to talk to the principal? What was necessary about it, instead of just meeting with students at lunch? Can't they just get together and talk?
The students could have gotten together at lunch and talked, and we could have just continued on that level. I felt that I needed to talk to the principal because I needed to somehow structure this, begin to develop a structure that could extend beyond the group. Like, I could see that one of the things was that there was a real lack of sensitivity on the part of the staff. Mm-hmm. And so there had to be some mechanism for training and sensitizing the staff. The librarian knew nothing about any gay affirming literature. There had to be, as a matter of fact, in those days, there was still some really terrible stuff in the library.
Sure.
So we had to begin to approach that. There were issues of harassment. All of the students spoke about being harassed. It was almost universal, if not overt harassment, and there was a lot of that, but subtle kinds of statements that were made that were very demeaning. So I thought, well, there seemed to be so many fronts that this led to, that I thought that we had to structure it in some form. And that was really why I went to talk to the principal. And maybe I just had to do it maybe for myself.
Well,
you know,
it certainly, you had to have some cover too. I mean, so that you
I didn't think of cover at that time, but maybe just, you know, the kind of energy that you get when you're in your mid-50s and suddenly you come out. You know, you develop this. Well, I wasn't quite in my mid-50s yet, but I was 50 when all this started, and I had been closeted to one extent or another for most of my life. So I had this boundless kind of energy, and I had to channel it in some way. And I don't know, I guess maybe I had to talk to the principal just to let him know what was happening and to get his read on it.
And he suggested you better get some support from the district.
Well, he was very supportive himself. But he suggested that, you know, if what I had in mind was to try and structure this, and he said, if you're going to try and structure this program here, you want to develop something that can be replicated at another school. Because he said, you can't be taking all the telephone calls, you know, from all over the district. He said, this is a program that will be necessary to have on every campus if we can get it. So in order to do that, you have to have the backing of the Board of Education somehow.
So you went to the board?
No, I really didn't go to the board. But I did have a friend on the board, Jackie Goldberg, and so I explained to her what was happening. She thought it was a great idea, and she said that she would support me as much as she could. And the board, our district has always been committed to the concept of diversity. Jackie made sure that diversity included gay and lesbian students, and I think Jackie was such a strong force herself that she was able to be persuasive for the other board members to go along with it.
Well, it was very important for I mean, she was the first, I think, open gay or lesbian person elected to the board.
She was not openly lesbian at the time she was elected.
That's right, she wanted to wait till her son graduated
but she was
from high school
certainly an
before she
advocate.
Right.
She was, I mean, whether she was open in her own mind,
Yeah.
I mean, she was definitely an advocate. And and we all know Jackie to be a very strong person, and she was able to talk to the other board members and say, you know, these are our students, these are our young people. We want to keep them in school. We don't want them blowing their brains out. You know, we want to do what we can. And her arguments were persuasive and certainly correct.
So it became pretty much more public. I mean, other schools heard about it, and I guess the right wing heard about it.
As it became more public, my enemies heard about it also. I found out that they were my enemies. At the beginning, I was very naive about this. But as it became more public, the people who were opposed to programs like this also became more public, and they began to organize. And it took them about 3 years to really seriously organize.
Talk about what they did.
They
and even who they were. I mean,
well, my most vocal opponent was Reverend Lou Sheldon of the Traditional Values Coalition organization here in Anaheim, and I had heard that he was sort of tracking me. Somebody told me that his newsletter said things like, there's a sodomy class going on at Fairfax High School. And so I knew he was tracking me, but you know, never got beyond that, and so I didn't think very much about it. Then I found out that he had connections with Marion LaFollette, who was an assemblywoman out in the Valley, and she was on the Assembly Education Committee in Sacramento. And she and some of her supporters tried to block all of the funds that were going to come into the Los Angeles Unified School District, which are in the billions, if we didn't stop this little teeny-weeny program. And the way I found out about it was that some reporter, Jerry Gilliam was his name, called me from Sacramento and said, did you know that this is happening in the Assembly? I was totally stunned. I mean, I pick up the telephone at the counter at Fairfax High School, and it's this reporter telling me that this thing is happening in the Assembly Education Committee. So when that occurred, of course, it was a huge furor in the district. And the right wing demanded open hearing, and so we had an 8-hour open hearing.
Here in LA? Here
in Los Angeles at the Board of Education, chaired by Jackie Goldberg.
That must have been a problem for them.
I mean, Jackie was great. And they tried to have a pro and a con speaker, you know, all the way through the day, but there were very many more pros than con speakers. And ultimately, the district stood behind the program, and that was pretty much the end of the really vocal opposition. I mean, there wasn't anything they could do about the program. It existed, but they continued to snipe at us in their newsletter, and they still do to this day. Most of the right-wing organizations say nasty things about Project 10.
So, when you were growing up, did you ever think you would turn out to be a hero?
I never thought I would turn out to be a hero. I still have trouble thinking of myself as a hero, to be perfectly honest with you. I was just a little kid during World War II, but to me the heroes were the fellows that jumped out of the airplanes in the middle of the night behind enemy lines, around D-Day, not knowing what was going to happen. That to me is a heroic thing. This never impressed me as being a heroic thing. It was just something that had to, I just became involved in it before I knew what was happening.
But at any given time, there's a risk, isn't there?
Well, of course there's a risk. I really never thought of the risk very much. And I was so enraged when finally, when the right wing did attack me, the statements that they made, I mean, I thought I was out there doing really good things, trying to keep kids from killing themselves. And my opponents are out there saying, oh, these are a bunch of pedophiles and they're just all sodomites and they just want to, corrupt all the young people and, make them all into homosexuals. They want to make up for the losses that they're having through AIDS. I mean, they were saying just these terrible things. And I guess it just got my Italian up. I couldn't stand that when I heard that. I mean, there was just no backing off at that point.
It's interesting to me, Gina, that a number of the national organizations, and I think a lot of the state gay and lesbian organizations, have started focusing recently on youth. And that really sort of meant a couple of things to me. One is sort of the lives of youth, what it's like, because we all kind of remember, but it's different than I think it is now, because now that young people can be out a little more, they feel a little more support, or I could be wrong, it creates more difficulties for them because they are out and people have consciousness about it and they have to deal with issues around sort of the visibility of it. So it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing. And the other thing is, I think there's some concern about who's going to come along behind us and run the movement. And so you find things like, youth colleges and Queer Lobby Day, and it must be a very different world for them. What do you see in the young people that you work with still? I mean, I know you're retired, but we'll talk a little about that later, because I don't think you're really retired.
Well, I see a lot of different things. First of all, I do see the students that you're talking about, who are experiencing an entirely different thing than I ever experienced or you ever experienced. It's a different time. There's also a part, that's one type of student. There's also, I think, still a large part of the youth, gay, lesbian population that is suffering the same kind of alienation that existed even when I was young. I mean, they may have more access to information, but they may not even be aware of that access. And the young people that are like in small communities, they still suffer the same kind of alienation. And I get phone calls about this all the time. So even though we do have we do have a whole youth movement in the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender community, and it's wonderful. I'm not worried at all about what's going to come after me, because I see young people that have more courage. I mean, when I was 15 or 16 or 17, I couldn't even say the words. And here they're out there, they're going to Sacramento, they're on the internet, they're starting up all kinds of groups and support groups. So I don't worry about what's come there. I think there will be leadership. I do still worry about what I think is the majority of the kids that are still lonely and still suffer a really, really isolated existence.
What kind of phone calls do you get?
Well, just last night I got a phone call from a therapist who was working with one of her trainees. The trainee had gotten this student referred to him, 14-year-old student, struggling with the issue of whether or not he was gay. He didn't know really how to talk to the therapist. He had now the therapist, interestingly enough, thought that he was really on track and could talk to the 14-year-old. I mean, he didn't think he was bothered by the subject at all. But as I was hearing the story, I could see that the therapist didn't know what to ask or really how to relate to the student. But the young man was totally disconnected from anything that we would call the gay culture. I mean, he had no concept of books or, he might have seen some things on television, and maybe that will have an effect on in a long range. But still, here was a young person that was, I think, very much at risk for doing some self-destructive acts. And here's this young 14-year-old right in the center of Los Angeles, but still far, far, far away. And I don't have to say to you, don't forget. It's like I'm preaching to the choir, but
well, it's a big choir out there, though.
But they don't have any connection with their family. That is the biggest rift of all, is that they're a minority in their own families. So they can't talk to their mother, they can't talk to their father, they can't talk to their brothers and sisters, at the beginning at least, about some of the torment that they're going through. So for them, the isolation is the way it always has been.
Now, is it really sort of out of being a teacher that you care about these kids? I mean, I guess in a way you want to take it for granted. Well, I'm a teacher, I care about kids. But, we all had a lot of teachers growing up. And you said yourself, well, I went to this college, was a women's college, and so many of us became teachers. You made it sound like it was sort of the next thing to do, not really a passionate avocation. This is what I heard. It may not be the fact. But you have devoted your life, your adult life really, in teaching to our kids. And it's just interesting to me because it's not something that everybody has done. Even if they see a problem, they don't wrestle with it, and they don't stand up about it. And I know you felt a connection because you and I both know what it's like to be in the closet and be scared and remembering what it was like to be a student. But why do you care so much about them?
Well, I think by nature, probably, I had to have some feeling for young people or I wouldn't have gone into teaching. And I think that on one level, had this never happened to me, this part of my life, I think I would have been a good teacher. And I would have continued to probably improve myself as a science teacher, and who knows, maybe get some awards as a science teacher. Because I had a good background in science, and that was my life, and I was very happy in teaching. This tapped something else. When this happened, this tapped something else. And yes, it became my life. I can't tell you why it did. It was an accumulation of all the things that had happened to me, I guess, in my own life, and what I could relate to. And it was a way that I saw that I could make an impression that maybe no one else could, or that I could do it in a way that was uniquely mine.
Well, you may have saved a lot of lives.
Well, I hope so. What I saw was such pain. When I began to, it was one thing when I was studying this. It was one thing to have my own experience, because my own experience was my own and I had to deal with it myself. It was another thing to read about these experiences in books, the statistics on youth suicide. It was still another thing again to actually begin talking to these young people.
What would the dream world look like for sort of the programs provided by a perfect school district?
Well, not to be simplistic, but I guess that if my dream would come true, it would simply be that gay, lesbian, or sexual minority youth would be able to take their rightful place within the school population. They would be able to be themselves. They would be able to socialize in a normal way. They'd be able to go to their dances. They would be able to talk about their experiences in class without having to worry about what someone would say. They would be affirmed by the adults around them. They would live in a democratic society in the real sense.
Do you think students are protected at schools now? I guess what I mean is the relationship between having a Project 10 at a school. Let's say there is a group and it meets. Does that really mean that the kids are protected at school?
I think that having a Project 10, well, let me see how I can word that. The greater the level of awareness that happens in a school, the safer the school becomes. So that I think Fairfax High School, for example, is now a fairly safe school for a gay kid, because not only do they have a Project 10, but they have a faculty which is, knows that Uribe has been around. I mean, there's a level of awareness so that anybody knows that if they say something they shouldn't say, if they make a derogatory comment, a pejorative comment, they know that there's going to be someone there to, bring them up short. It's become such a natural thing around Fairfax that, we can put up a display case. For the last few years that I was there, I had a display case that was up for months. Nobody ever touched it or made a bad comment or anything like that. So I think that the more awareness that develops, the better the school becomes. Does that mean that things don't happen? Things still happen. I mean, homophobia is still present.
Well, you have a new generation of students
right.
every year coming out of the middle schools. Are there programs at middle schools?
We have, not as formalized, but we do have a lot of programs. We have a lot of point people, and we have material that goes into the middle schools. It's a little harder in middle school because the kids are not as articulate about defining themselves yet, but it's certainly necessary. I mean, basically, we all feel, that this education has to start right from elementary school. We have to start in elementary school with dealing with issues of respect for one another and differences in families, differences in people, no name calling. Those are things that start right at the beginning and work their way up. In a way, by the time we get them in high school, sometimes it's a little too late.
When you talked about a safe environment or not fully safe environment, there's a question that I think comes up, sort of pedagogical question, or at least in terms of the teaching environment for all kind of minority youth, including I think in college, and that is whether it's better for us to have a program of our own, a safe place, a cocoon, if you will, or whether it's better, if it's a choice, to be integrated in everything. Should there be a gay and lesbian student center, and that's where all the kids, hang out? Should there be a gay and lesbian prom instead of having to take your same-sex partner to the prom? I wonder if you have an opinion about that.
I think that both approaches are very good. I think it's good to have some kind of a special place for a group, and it's also very necessary for the group to be integrated. We don't seem to have any problem with the Black Student Union existing at school, and yet Black studies or whatever are integrated at the same time. So I think for identity purposes and strength, it's very important to have a special group. But I think it's equally, well, probably more important for it to be integrated. It's great to have a Project 10 group, but it's certainly equally, if not more valuable, to be able to have gay, lesbian issues discussed in English classes, political science, for there to be a free and open forum for the discussion of issues around these kids. So I don't think it's one or the other. And as far as the gay prom is concerned, that's kind of interesting because many students are opting not to go to the gay prom anymore. They feel comfortable going to their own proms. So that may become a victim of progress too.
And how about a whole separate school? Don't we have a separate school in the district?
We have a separate school in the district, but the separate school is really a special needs school. That is for students who, and it's not a large school, it's more an alternative school with maybe 40 students. That is for students who absolutely cannot function in the regular mainstream environment. And we have other schools like that in our district.
But the population of that particular school, is it called the...
it's called Eagle Center.
Eagle Center.
And
is
in Long
gay
Beach,
and lesbian students
it's
high
gay,
school
it's not,
age?
it's, I think they have to be 14 years of age. And it's targeted to gay, lesbian, transgender students, but it's really open to anyone. But the population that it serves is really the gay, lesbian, transgender population. These are kids who they either have terrible interruptions in their academic background, they can't function in school, they have been harassed to the extent where they're not going to school, they are cross-dressing or something where they bring on such harassment that they can't function, or they're sick and they can't go to the regular school. So it's really a special needs kind of environment. And for that, I think it has a purpose. Do I think that it takes the place of a regular school? No. I think it's much more important that students, that we make our schools sensitive so that our sexual minority youth can attend a regular school.
You retired recently. I
That's
say
a laugh.
this with a smile. Well, see, we're both laughing about it. By which I guess we both mean you're not teaching full-time.
I'm not teaching full-time. My partner, who is at Hamilton High School, has now taken over coordinating Project 10 for the district. So what I'm doing is I'm acting as a consultant. Really, when I retired, they got 2 for the price of 1 because now, I'm on the phone all day. And also, we're developing a Project 10 website that is not for students, not that it's secretive, it's just that the target group for the website is teachers, counselors, administrators, people that need the kind of advice that I think we can provide for them just based on the experiences that we've had. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time on that.
So you're kind of a one-woman answer machine. When you say you spend a lot of time on the phone, I'm just imagining people they care about this young man. He's apparently gay. He's very lost. He's at their high school. They think, I'll call Virginia Uribe.
That's exactly how a lot of the phone calls come.
From teachers?
Or they're from teachers,
parents?
They're from counselors. Sometimes they're from parents, not often from parents. But they're from teachers, counselors, principals. I get a surprisingly large number of phone calls from elementary school principals.
And what would they say?
Well, usually in elementary school, the thing that brings them to call me is because the young person's being harassed. A very effeminate boy, a very masculine girl. The students are picking on them. The teachers don't know what to do. The parents are screaming they want the schools to change the kid. The administrators don't know what to do, and so they say, call Virginia Uribe. That's a typical kind of phone call that I get from an elementary school. But those are the kinds of calls I get. A lot of people I find are very well-meaning. I don't really get very many phone calls anymore from the haters because they wouldn't bother calling me. I get calls from people who are well-meaning, but they're very awkward. In their mind, the issue of homosexuality is so distant in their mind that even though they try to understand, they still think of these kids as being from another planet. And so, I try to encourage them to use the regular techniques that they would use in counseling to work with these kids. And so that's what a lot of the conversations are about. A lot of the conversations are just gab sessions. What do I do? And we just start talking about how you might play out a certain thing.
Do you have a next project in mind, or not that you don't have enough work just answering the phone and being the consultant, but is there something further you'd like to see happen that you want to be involved in?
Well, we, and when I say we, I say my partner and I have made an application for a grant that if we get it, we think is the next step. And that is this. The major stumbling block that we have in all of our efforts in the schools is the fact that the administrators are reluctant to go along with it. Either they're afraid, or they're afraid of parents, or whatever. So even though we produce and distribute maybe 800 packets of information every year during June, Gay Awareness Month, we send packets of information to all the elementary, middle schools, and high schools. Posters, lessons, you name it, it's in this packet, and it's all approved by the district. Every single thing is approved by the district. Most of those packages end up in the wastebasket because the principals are afraid to act. They're afraid to deal with a controversial subject. So anyway, we have put in for for a grant where we would like to do a series of workshops for high school and middle school principals. We feel that that's the next step. And we think we could get the backing of the district to support this. If they didn't have to pay for it, they would at least support us in trying to do these sessions. We think if we could break down that stumbling block of the administrators, would make it a lot easier for materials to be circulated in school, would make it a lot easier for teachers to use the materials because the teachers are still afraid. Mm-hmm. So that's what I have my sights set on for the next couple of years.
You know, it's so interesting to me, Gina, because when I first got into the state assembly, Willie Brown appointed me to the education committee. And the year that I was elected, 94, was the same year that a number of new Republicans who were elected were brought specifically out of sort of the extreme right end of the Republican Party and what we would call the right wing. And they all clamored to be on the education committee. And it seemed to me, I sort of had a dawning understanding that this is the battleground for these ideas. And I think it's sort of, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree notion for each student, but to also control the content of really what we would pass on as the truth. I mean, what is it that children must learn? And I understood that there were kind of two different things in there. The subject matter that they learned, what did they learn in science and math and language? But the other struggle was about how much they would be allowed to think for themselves, be creative, be who they were, even if that was different. And how much they would be not allowed to be creative and think for themselves, but to learn what was taught to them and to understand there was a norm to which they should adhere. And it was this giant struggle, maybe not cosmic so much, because after all it is just the government, but this notion, this larger notion of the struggle over education. And to me that's what you've really been engaged in. I'm not sure if it ever looks that way from the inside. But I mean, why the right wing was so focused on this particular thing?
Well, the right wing loves all things sexual. And okay, and they want to be on the education committee because they want to get involved in issues like sex education, things that touch upon abortion, and homosexuality is of course one of their other big battlegrounds. So yes, we are right in the middle of it. Yes, that things that have to do with sex. Well, I don't even want to put this. I don't want to put the Project 10 program or the whole subject of homosexuality even in the context of sex.
That's not the way we define it.
Because that's not the way we define it. That's just the way they define it. But that is where the struggle is. All things connected with that. Most of the censorship goes on in connection with that. And so we are right in the middle of it.
Well, it's a serious expression of individuality. I mean, it's not certainly the only one. But a person's sexuality is so central to their individuality. But you know, there were other things too. I mean, the arts, for instance, which are not totally the province, you know, of gay people, but certainly we have been involved in the creative arts. Partly it's been more tolerant atmosphere, but also, you know, when they started doing away with art classes and music classes and all of those things that had anything to do with creativity,
yes.
It seemed to me it was kind of connected. Like, let's keep you from being proud of who you are or what you are, and let's, you know, see if we can't keep you all on the, literally on the straight and narrow.
Well, I think the more that you can close down free and open discussion, the more you can control people. And I think that there is certainly an element of our population that wants to do that. But we're not going to let them do that if we can help it.
So do you feel like your life's been a success?
I feel that I have gotten everything anybody could want in life. I have a wonderful family, a wonderful partner, I have a great reward in teaching, and I have something that I think I've been able to do that is unique. And what more could anyone want?
You have 3 children?
I have 2 children.
2 children.
And 2 grandchildren.
And are they proud of you? I mean, do they have a sense of what you've accomplished?
Oh, I think that they are proud of me. Mm-hmm.
It's funny to think that our kids and grandchildren should be proud of us, because normally we're going to be proud of them. But you know, after a while you do.
No, I think that they are, and that gives me, because I'm very open with my grandchildren. I will not make the mistake with them that I made with my own children when they were young. And I find that they're very, I don't even want to say accepting. I mean, it's just life for them. And they have no problems. Of course, they watch things on television that, I mean, that are defined for them even more than I could. So, no, I think that my grandchildren are proud of me. My children are proud of me. And that makes, I mean, what more could anyone want?
Well, I think it's wonderful. I wonder, have you been asked to help other school districts start projects like Project 10?
Yes, well, we do that kind of consulting.
Around
That's
the
when I
country,
say
or
that I'm
kinda
on the
in
telephone all the
California,
time.
or?
Well, I mean, I get phone calls from all over the country, and the majority of them are in California. But no, I get phone calls from all over the country, and then there are other organizations that have started, you know, as a result of the opening of the dialogue that we did. There are other organizations that have started that are now serving the country also, and so that's been a great help.
Do you find the same kind of programs in colleges, or do you think there's not as much of a need?
No, in college, there generally is a gay student alliance in college. I think the need that exists in college is different, and that is that the people who are being trained to go out in the different fields need to be made aware and sensitive to these issues.
Well, we've had a lot of dialogue lately about teacher training, partly because in California we have now had this class size reduction movement, so that in the first 3 grades, and I think starting next year in the 8th grade as well, we're going to have, you know, vastly reduced classes, which means vastly increased need for teachers, which means we've been giving a lot of emergency credentials to teachers and talking a lot about teacher training. Is there anything in teacher training now that has to do with this kind of diversity, sensitivity?
There are things in teacher training programs that say the word diversity, but to my knowledge, when the word homophobia is put in there with diversity, it doesn't pass the state legislature very easily. So I think that there will be teacher training programs that will include gays and lesbians in their concept of diversity. That's going to be on an individual basis, and that's where we still have a lot more work to do.
Well, it's interesting to me, one of the things we talk about being so proud of in America is our diversity, right? We have diversity of immigrants. You know, your grandparents from Italy, my grandparents from Russia and Germany, and everybody's grandparents from somewhere else, certainly in our generation. And we're proud of that. And yet, when I bring a bill that has to do, it even, I think, was about sort of gender discrimination in schools. It had nothing to do with gay and lesbian kids, but I had the word diversity in there. And Lou Sheldon showed up and said, you know, well, that's a code word for for homosexuality, as though diversity itself is suspect, which I guess in a way it is to them.
Well, it is to Lou Sheldon, but to the general population, I mean, diversity is becoming more and more inclusive of different groups. And as a society, I think that we're at a state where we can encompass many groups, but homosexuality or homosexuals as a group is still difficult for society to accept.
Well, and this is, I mean, the school is kind of the place where you first come in contact with others. I mean, your home is your home, and they're mostly like you, and you learn one thing. And then there's your neighborhood, and a lot of that is mostly like you too, whatever it's like. So the school becomes the place where you really need to learn about this stuff. And I think that's why it is most important in the whole structure. If you were to give advice right now to teachers, new teachers especially, what would you say to them?
I think that the most important thing for teachers with regard to the issue of gay and lesbian youth, which is what we're talking about, is that they must examine their own biases. And I have a test on examining biases, which will be on my website, which they all should plug in, www.project10.org, starting in August. And they should take this test, because I think people are not aware of their own biases, whether you're gay or non-gay. I mean, people might be aware of the stuff on the surface, like don't say the word faggot. Okay, they're at that level, they can understand. But the more subtle things, like keeping everything invisible when you can bring up a subject in an appropriate fashion, those kinds of things teachers need to, that's what they need to do. They need to examine their biases, face them, and see how they can overcome them and move on.
Virginia Uribe, the hour's gone by. It pretty much flies by, doesn't it? Thank you very much for spending this hour with us. I mean, I
Pleasure.
admire your work so very much, and I'm glad to let everybody else know about it as well, and glad that you were with us. Probably a lot of you grew up gay or lesbian and wondered in high school why you were so amazingly different, and now you wish you had Virginia Uribe at your school and as your teacher, because then you would have had somebody who's saying to the whole system, get used to it. See you next time.